since I'm not here today, I'm going to have to give you a little lesson for you to take notes with using haiku. And today we are going to talk about two kinds of organisms in the world. They are the makers and the takers. Here are the makers. And here are the takers, also called producers, the makers, and consumers, the takers. So, are you a maker or are you a taker? Well, the answer to that is you are a taker. And we all are takers. Because the only makers there are plants and algae. These are organisms that make their own food or make their own source of energy. We, on the other hand, have to get our energy from other organisms. That makes us consumers or takers. So let's start by talking about producers. And I am going to use a rose as an example. And I'm going to go ahead and draw that. I'm going to do my best. And what do you think of my rose? Okay, and let's talk about takers or consumers. And I'm going to draw a cow. Here is the cow. There's some horns and ears. Moo. And let's talk about what these two things need to survive. So, a plant, as you all probably know, needs two things to survive. It needs several things, actually, more than two things. It needs light from the sun or something artificial. And it also needs something called carbon dioxide. You might know it as CO2. And one last thing it needs, you have to water your plants, right? So these are three things they need to survive. Now, what do consumers need to survive? So what do we need to survive? Well, we need oxygen, which I'm going to write as O2. We breathe in oxygen. And we need glucose, which is another word for sugar. So go ahead and write this on your paper, on your notes. Okay? Now, plants, when they take in light, and when they take in CO2, and they take in water, they go through something called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. And during photosynthesis, they produce oxygen and glucose. Now, there's another process you need to learn about. You probably learned about photosynthesis in the past already. And this is the opposite of photosynthesis. It's what consumers do. It's what we do. We breathe in oxygen and we eat glucose. And then we end up producing CO2 and water. But we don't produce light. No, we don't. We produce something else, and that is called ATP. ATP, which is the fuel for our cells. So really what's happening here is that sunlight, so here's the sun, provides us energy to the plant. That energy goes to us in the form of ATP. So really what's happening is it is producing a circle of life like this that keeps going and going, because when we eat glucose and breathe oxygen, we produce water and carbon dioxide. So if you're wondering, wait, we produce water? Yeah, when you go to the bathroom, you produce water, right? So now when you flush the toilet, you can sing to yourself, the circle of life. Okay, so moving on. Let's make it. And if you want to complete your table, please pay close attention. We have 2 columns that you need to fill out. The first is for photosynthesis. And the second column is for cellular respiration. We'll usually just call it respiration. And what kind of organisms do they take place in? Well, photosynthesis takes place in, again, what we just talked about, producers. And cellular respiration occurs in consumers. Oh man, that didn't fit. Sorry about my sloppy writing. And the cell part that they take place in. Well, the photosynthesis takes place in chloroplasts. And cellular respiration occurs in, let me draw the discs. Cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondrion. Mitochondrion. I'm running out of room again. Okay, so let's review what they need in order to occur. So you have photosynthesis right here and cellular respiration right here. Photosynthesis requires 3 things. It requires carbon dioxide, it requires water, and if you want to write H2O, that is just fine. And it requires one more thing. That's right, sunlight, or light. Cellular respiration, on the other hand, requires oxygen, or O2 if you're lazy like me, and it also requires glucose, which is another word for a simple form of sugar. Now, what do they produce? Well, in photosynthesis, it produces glucose and oxygen, whereas cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide, water, and not light, but ATP, otherwise known as adenosine triphosphate, which will never fit with my sloppy writing. All right, so let's talk about the last part. Number 3, fermentation is the breakdown of glucose without oxygen. So this is a special kind of process. It's kind of like cellular respiration, and it takes in glucose and it breaks it down to make ATP. However, it does not use oxygen. And it's really important for all sorts of things like making yogurt. Here's yogurt. Okay? Or making pickles. How do you think they get so sour? Yep, that's right, fermentation. Or sometimes, well, bread can also be made by fermentation. How do you think those bubbles get there? Fermentation. Now, here's a little interesting thing about fermentation is that your muscles go through fermentation too. Have you ever had sore muscles after working them out? Well, that's because your muscles have went through something called fermentation. Your muscles did not get enough oxygen to them, and that's what makes them sore because they produce something called lactic acid. And we're not the animal that goes through fermentation. Yes. There's my lizard. And lizards also, when they run, they go through fermentation every time. Because when they run, they cannot breathe and run at the same time because of the positioning of their arms. Because their limbs are on their sides. So it squeezes their lungs and they cannot breathe at the same time. Now a cheetah, on the other hand, is different. Because a cheetah its limbs are beneath its body. That allows it to breathe and run at the same time. And same with us. We run with our lower legs, so we don't even worry about squeezing our chest. So we can run long distances. Have you ever tried to chase a lizard? They're really fast if you try to chase them for a minute. It's really hard to catch them. But if you ever get them in an open area, they run out of energy and slow down really fast. And they get tired really fast because their muscles only operate through fermentation. They cannot get oxygen to their muscles while they're running. Okay, well, that does it for today's lesson. And if you need to, please rewind this and go back to finish your notes. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.